Good.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Ginger Olszewski, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all to our evening with novelist Kimberly Brock here at Beaufort's NeverMore Books, hosted by the nonprofit Pat Conroy Literary Center. We want to thank NeverMore's owners, Lori and Dave Anderson, for their friendship and for making this space available to us tonight. We're delighted to host Kimberly, who is on tour for her newly released second novel, The Lost Book of Eleanor Dare, which is set here in the Lowcountry during World War II. This evening, Kimberly will be interviewed by Holland, Perryman, and Jonathan Haupt, who also reviewed the novel for the Charleston Post Courier. In that review, they praised the book as a beautiful keepsake of a novel that is at once historical and speculative. The Lost Book of Eleanor Dare is the empowering tale of nearly 20 generations of women surviving, thriving, and sometimes vanishing by virtue of their abilities to shoulder the weight of their pasts, to discover and learn the lessons of their present, and to pass on their wisdom from mother to daughter through the inheritance of their stories, some of which might even be true. Novelist Kimberly Brock is also the author of The River Witch, for which she was recognized with the prestigious Georgia Author of the Year Award for Debut Fiction in 2013 by the Georgia Writers Association. A former actor and special needs educator, Kimberly is the founder of the Tinderbox Writers Workshop, a creative experience for women in the arts. She has served as a guest lecturer and instructor for many national and regional groups, including the Women's Fiction Annual Conference and our own Pat Conroy Literary Center. She lives near Atlanta with her husband and 3 children. Interviewer Holland Perryman is the first student intern of both the Conroy Center and the Friends of South Carolina Libraries. She is a senior at Beaufort High School, where she is student body president, captain of the girls varsity lacrosse team, winner of the Ann Head Literary Prize for Short Story, and founder of DALO, Diversity Awareness Youth Literacy Organization. This fall, she will begin her studies at Vanderbilt University as a Chancellor Scholar. Holland is joined by her mentor. Holland is joined by her mentor, Jonathan Haupt, the executive director of the Conroy Center, the former director of the University of South Carolina Press, and co-editor of our Prince of Scribes, Writers Remember Pat Conroy, the winner of 17 book awards. Please welcome Kimberly, Holland, and Jonathan.
Thank you, everybody, for being with us this evening. We're going to spend the first 20 minutes talking about why Holland's bio is 3 times longer than mine. Is it because I wrote it?
Yes.
Yes. No, that's not at all what we're going to do. We're very excited to have Kimberly Brock with us here with a brand new book that Holland and I did, in fact, get to review for the Charleston Post Courier. And we're very excited to welcome you back to Beaufort, a place where you've been once before on behalf of the Conroy Center. So welcome back, Kimberly.
Thank you. And thank you for making the book sound really good. It helps that it was really good. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to start at the beginning. And a lot of this book is about the Lost Colony of Roanoke. So I remember being in 4th grade in a history class and learning about the explorers and learning about this colony and thinking, what on earth happened? And that there has to be more of a story, and why is it such a big mystery? So where did that begin for you? Where did you first hear about that, and also of Eleanor Dare?
Okay, you asked for long answers. Get ready.
I'm ready.
Yep. So for me, just like you, I think probably around 4th or 5th grade, that's when you start to learn about the Lost Colony of Roanoke. And I think every kid remembers that piece of history because it's like the Twilight Zone, right? And it's a story. And there's not an end. There's no ending to it. And that is a hook, right? And so I think we all remember at least that little bit of it and wonder about it. And for me, I was always a kid who was into things I should not have been into. So, like, if there was a door, I wanted to be behind it. If there was a key, I wanted to open whatever it opened. If there was say you're on a trail on a field trip and there's a sign where you're not supposed to go that way, and then they have to search for you later. That might have happened. So I was that kind of kid, so the story really interested me. Also, my dad is our family historian, and that's all we did on vacation, is go to battlefields or go to World War II memorials. And as a kid, you're just standing there sweating and wondering why you're there doing that. But as an adult, that changes somewhat. And then you asked about Eleanor Dare in particular. I had written a short story, my first short story that was published, and I had decided I think I'll write a book. I had 2 babies that were 16 months apart. I was in Cary, North Carolina, far from my place where I grew up in Georgia, and the internet was new. They would take a nap, and I could use the internet like you could a library, like it was magic. It was in your house. So I would sit there and just comb through things, looking for anything that might interest me that I could think about writing into a story. And I was in particular looking at Georgia, and I came across this article about the Dare Stones. I love to find something that I should know about, and I don't. And I was so intrigued. There's this newspaper article, and it says that in 1937, this fella's on vacation, and he stops on the side of the road in Edenton, North Carolina, as you do when you're a man on vacation, and he trips over a rock, and it has inscription on it. And at the time, 1937, right at the end of the Depression, and it was sort of the heyday for Barnum, and it was, there were all kinds of fake effigies and Indian artifacts being made and hoaxes and all kinds of that kind of thing going on in the nation. And he looked at that and he thought, well, this might be worth something. So he threw it in his trunk, and they kept on their vacation and ended up down in Atlanta. And he waltzed into Emory University with this big rock and said, what do you think? And they lost their minds because they thought it was Elizabethan English. They thought that it was a message from the governor's daughter from the colony of Roanoke. There were the initials EWD, which they think stood for Eleanor White Dare. And if you have heard the name Virginia Dare, Virginia was her child. The stone says there was a massacre. Everybody's gone. My husband and daughter have been killed. There's a few of us left. This is where we're going. Thanks, Dad. Because the colony left. Or they left where they were, according to this stone, and moved inland. Her father had left 3 years before to go get supplies and never returned. When he came back, there was no sign of them except for, the famous Croatoan on the fence, right? And I looked at it and I thought, holy cow, how can I not know that? Because I grew up like an hour from where these stones are housed now, at Brenau University in Gainesville, Georgia. And I'll tell you more about that if you ask.
Well, as you started discovering these stories that were new to you, brand new information through research to the brand new internet, which I understand is a series of tubes or something like that Al Gore invented.
It was really strange.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Magic.
How did you find yourself negotiating between documented history and what you needed to do as a storyteller? Because this is a big part of what happens in the book as well, whether our commitment is to the facts, whatever those might be, or what we need to get out of a particular story. In Beach Music, Conroy writes in a character in the protagonist of that book that stories don't have to be true, they only have to help. And there's a line that's very similar to that in your novel that's repeated often.
I did not know that.
Yes, and I want to get it right. Story matters not because it's true, but because it has been told. So what does that mean to you as the writer of this story, working with historical fiction, but also what your characters need you to do for them?
Well, I'll give you the honest answer. When I wrote it, I remember sitting back and thinking, what in the world does that mean? And it took me a long time. Like, I didn't know, but I knew it needed to stay in. The character that the line is from, that dialogue is from, is unreliable at best, but she's a mother. I don't know any more unreliable narrator in my life than my mother. Because mothers don't tell you the truth. They mete out the truth. They give you what you need in the moment when you need it. And that doesn't mean that they're omitting things or holding things that they intend to never tell you necessarily, but sometimes you run out of time. And so that's where that came from. And when I first wrote it, I thought, that's kind of irresponsible. Like, can that really be true, that it doesn't matter if your story is true? And what it came down to was the difference between fact and story. Story has truth embedded in it. It doesn't necessarily have to be the facts. As far as research, informing, and kind of wading through what I wanted to use, we'll go back to the Dare Stones, because what happened is after this huge spectacle, the man that was the president at Brownell University, which was a women's college in Gainesville, Georgia, still there, and his son, who was a professor at Emory, they took the stone with them to Gainesville, to the college. And they said, all right, folks, if anybody else finds one of these little stones with writing on it, we'll pay you for it. So what happens, right? Every moonshiner is showing up with something they've found in the creek or the barn, right? And then a few years later, everything was debunked by a Saturday Evening Post reporter who found the guy that they were working with, that they think this is what happened. Nobody ever actually proved it, but it's pretty obvious that most of those 48 stones that tell a story that conveniently brings Eleanor from North Carolina down into Georgia, down near the college. And this is the part that I love. So those stones say, it's about 1937, right? Picture this. Eleanor Dare has survived a massacre, has gone to live with the Native Americans, because everybody I know when I was growing up would say, we have Cherokee in our blood. And probably not, some of them maybe, but it was sort of a fantasy that we have about Native Americans in our country, and it's sort of a fantasy here, I think, too, because it's a woman. She marries the king of this Native American tribe that's in North Georgia and lives in this beautiful valley where she has a child, and then they turn upon her and force her down the river with other people, where she dies in a cave in Fulton County, about 10 minutes from where I live. And I thought, doesn't that just sound like some story a man would make up to make a buck? And at that point, I went to see the stone. And I was interested in it, but what I didn't expect was how emotional I would be when I saw it. And I cried looking at it. And I thought, what is this? And I realized that I didn't care if it was true. What mattered to me was that she was remembered. And I thought, if I was that girl, and I was 19 and pregnant, and had gotten on a boat with my daddy to go out into the wilderness, and then he had left, and I'd had a child, a husband and child had been killed, and I was standing there, I don't think I would be thinking, this is really going to work out. I'm going to make it. I would have just wanted to be remembered. And I think if that stone is real in any way at all, that's how it's real. It's how we remember her. And I think that's how we remember anybody that we've lost.
What you just said, so much of this story is about maternal lineage and passing something from a mother to a daughter, which is not how most of history was written or told. And so it's a beautiful, beautiful thing to read. But we have that repetition of mother to daughter all the way up to World War II, where your book is happening, and Penn has lost her father, and Alice has lost her husband and her dad. Could you tell us a little bit about that strong relationship of mother and daughter that shaped so much of them and bring them through that tragedy?
So Alice Young is the main character in the book, and she is a difficult person. She is not a likable character at all, I don't think, from the very beginning. And I felt judgmental about her the whole time I wrote her. I wanted her to be better than she was, which is why I kept writing, because I wanted to see what would happen to her. How do really how is her daughter going to change her? Because I think that's where change happens in most of us when we have our children, or we become involved with other members of our family who are children, who are asking us questions, asking us what Penn, her 13-year-old daughter, is asking, which is, who are you? And who am I? Who does that make me? And then you have to decide, well, what am I going to say about that? What am I going to actually tell you? And what am I going to protect you from? And I think those are decisions that absolutely follow all of the women in this book, and right up to how I tell the story of Eleanor, which is not a dual timeline. It's not traditional. It's a fable. It's a mother-to-daughter story that's been handed down, which may or may not all be true.
Well, let's talk about the delivery mechanism for the fable, because you've got a book within a book, which I absolutely love as a literary device, and it's a commonplace book. Is that a term familiar to some of you historically? Yeah, these existed. George Washington's adopted daughter had Nellie Custis Lewis had a very famous one. One of Archibald Rutledge's ancestors here in South Carolina had one as well that's still in print in a facsimile edition. So, it's well documented that these existed, but would you talk a little bit about what a commonplace book is and why it's so essential to the way that you tell this particular story?
So I was doing research about printing and early printing that might have been going on in London at the time that Eleanor would have been there. We know next to nothing about her. I find it so intriguing that her father, initially, he was a miniaturist. So he was a painter, and he drew these little miniature paintings of people. There's not a single painting of Eleanor. His paintings after that were when he went overseas and was doing his first expeditions. He was documenting what he was seeing so they could put that in front of the Queen and convince her to fund more expeditions. So he was making this beautiful world and all of these beautiful. He was painting the animals. He was painting the Native Americans that were there, the indigenous people that they were meeting, in a way that made them look very much like family. They had children with toys, they were dressed beautifully, they weren't savages like you would see them described in lots and lots and lots of the stuff that you can read from that time. So I was looking at that, and I was thinking about how little we know about Eleanor herself and what she would have been seeing and what she would have valued because of what her father valued. And he was gone all the time. And I thought, well, what does she have of her mother's? Eleanor's mother died, and a brother when Eleanor was young. So while Dad was off on a business trip to the New World, Eleanor was home with who knows who at all, but not with Dad and not with Mom. So I gave her a book. Because what do we want from our mamas, right? And I thought, there are so many things I don't know about my mother. I don't think we're supposed to. I don't think it's your mother's job to just reveal all of her. In fact, I don't think we know we probably know our mothers less than we know anybody. We know our grandmothers. Grandmothers probably know us very well. Mother's friends probably know her better than we do. And I thought, what if I had a book that had all of those things in it that I wish that I knew? And I've heard so many people talk about that as they're losing their mothers or losing their sisters or aunts, especially in female relationships. I wish I had those things, those stories. So I gave her this book that's been passed down that had all of those precious things in it. Little stories, little prayers, little pieces of art, recipes. How do you grow something? I can't grow a weed. I wish I had a book that would tell me how to grow things. All of those precious things. And if it had been passed down for 16 generations, I'm a little girl who loved the library. So give it to me.
With that, I'm curious, you talked about this a little bit, but I feel like there's more to say, especially with what you just said. How much of Alice and Penn's relationship came from your relationship with your mother or people in your life?
I think all of it. I mean, how can it not? It's coming out of my head. But I've also thought about Penn is a lot like Damascus in my first book. Alice is a lot like Rosalind in my first book. So I'm still working through something there that I'm trying to figure out in my own subconscious, I think. But I do know that I write when I'm finished and I go back and I read it, I realize, oh, I'm writing that to me when I was 13. Or I'm writing that to me when I was the young mom. Or I'm writing that because I hope that's how I turn out one day. Or this is, a warning to myself. Don't do it this way because it will go bad. So I see that when I'm finished with it and I can pull back and start talking about it. And it's funny, this book tour, the more I talk about it, the more I think, oh my God, I'm really smart. Like, I didn't even realize I was doing that, And I love that part. And I love when other readers find something and I realize, oh, that's what that was. But then it's also disappointing sometimes if I missed an opportunity and somebody sees it and I'm like, oh, I wish I had been smart enough to recognize that.
Let's talk about another aspect of the book that we got to write about in the review. One of the most compelling aspects of Southern fiction, Southern writing in general, is you never have to wonder where a story takes place because you're going to be told, because it's essential to the plot. And because of that, setting can also be a character, and very often is. And that's certainly true in your novel, really in two regards, both the city of Savannah, in which much of the story takes place, but also this ancestral home that Alice and Penn are coming home to, and what coming home means is different for each of them. So would you talk a little bit about why Savannah, why the Low Country, and then where this house, where Evertale came from for you as a writer?
Okay, if I get lost in this, bring me back.
You got it.
So I'll start with Evertale. Writing about, I just wrote a piece for Writer's Digest about writing about the South, why we love to read about the South in fiction, and why is it so compelling. And I think it's because everything in the South is extreme. Everything. It is such a love-hate relationship for me. I love it more than I hate it, but it's like writing about an abusive relative that you love dearly. I think it's a haunted house. The South is full of ghosts. It's full of stories. We tell as many stories in the South, but I think there are a lot we don't tell. Maybe more. And, ooh, spooky rain, just in time
Right
for
on
the
cue.
haunted
Right on
house.
cue.
Now I'm lost. Now I don't know what I'm even talking about. So Evertale, to me, was how I drew the South. It's a big haunted house. It used to be full of all of the things that we loved, all of our keepsakes. I loved that. And now it's empty. It used to hold a place for us. We left and we've come home, not necessarily ours anymore. We're trying to figure out what it is now. What is the South now? I think I have that conversation daily, either with my husband or my kids or another writer. And yet, it is the most familiar place. And you don't even have to be from the South. But I don't think it's real. When we write about it in fiction, I don't think we even want it to be real. It is a fable. It is a folk tale. We're finding ourselves in it. And I know this is going to sound really cheesy, but I thought of it as an origin tale for these women, for our country, because it's where we started. And that's where Eleanor started. So I traced where I could imagine, because I deviated from the men tale about the Native Americans on the stones, and I gave Eleanor her own story. And I'll tell you about that, because that took me a long time. But I traced where I thought women would move through American history, how they might have ended up down on the coast in Savannah. What was the next thing? That's why I got to Savannah. I got back there. I did good.
You did. See, you didn't get lost at all. You landed in a good spot.
I was going to say, you just talked about ghosts and stories, and I have a question about ghosts and stories, so I have to do it. you were in Beaufort previously, I think only one time, is that right? And you taught a class at the Anchorage, and you said all stories are ghost stories. How is that true of the Lost Book of Eleanor Dare?
Because why else would you spend 9 years writing about something if it wasn't haunting you, like always right behind you, if you weren't just trying to catch it out of the corner of your eye, if it wasn't a regret, you wouldn't mull over it. And I'm like a crock pot. Like, it takes a long time before I actually write the story. I think about it a really long time. So that's what I mean. I think all stories, if you get down to why that story was ever written, it had to haunt the author. Whatever the seed of it was, whatever their reason for writing it is, it comes from some personal wound, I think.
There are two other writers in our circle, the collective, our circle, that come to mind, when I was reading this and hearing you talk about it as well. And one is Natasha Boyd, the Indigo Girl. Some of you are familiar with that one, I'm sure. And then Patty Callahan Henry, becoming Mrs. Lewis. And they both describe very much what you described when you saw the stone, sort of being emotionally connected to a person who is no longer living, whose story that you were discovering, and that you feel, as they have said many times, you sort of feel like you're now the caretaker of that story. You're, the avatar for them in the modern world to tell that story. Do you feel that kind of responsibility for Eleanor, that kind of connection? Is that something that sustained you over those 9 years?
Yeah. I can remember multiple times saying to my husband, what if I die and I've not finished this? Because I know what I'm trying to say, but nobody else is going to know what I'm trying to say. Will somebody else pick this up and finish it? If I just don't finish it, it doesn't need to be a masterpiece. I just need to finish it for her, because I didn't want this story to end up being put aside like the Dare Stones were and turned into a joke. I wanted this to be for her. And my agent, I turned in a novel 3 years ago that was the whole 1945 part of this book. And she read it. I thought it was done. And she said, this is great. I'm so excited about this. Now where's the rest? And it was big. It was a clunker of a book already. And I was like, what are you talking about? And she said, well, I know it's all in your head, but it's not here. You kind of reference it, these women and who these other heirs are. And she said, I don't need their whole story, but what happened to Eleanor? And she was so right. I had like 5 or 6 of those legal notepads, the yellow ones, just filled with, I had written out stories, I had researched where they would have gone, because I needed to know in my head how I thought they would have gotten to Savannah and ended up there in this big pre-revolutionary house, and who they had been to some degree. And I mean, I had like birth and death dates and how many babies and where they were at and little bits of what might have happened to them there. And so she said, you gotta write Eleanor's story. And I said, nope. And it took her 6 weeks to convince me, because I felt like I was overstepping trying to give this story to someone who actually lived, that I didn't have any business doing that it was okay for us just to speculate on our own and say, oh, Eleanor, wasn't she a great gal? And she said, no, you got to write it. And I kept trying to do it. I didn't want her to just, when we think about the Lost Colony, I don't know about you, but I was thinking, like, how am I going to make that interesting? I don't want to read about pilgrims, and that's how kind of like how I had in my head. And I thought, wait a minute, that's not who they were. And they were not at Plymouth, they were on a southern island. And I started thinking about that differently. And then I started thinking about who would be telling the story. And I woke up at 2 in the morning, and I could hear it in my head starting. And it wasn't that typical dual timeline, third-person history. It was a story. It was a story being whispered to me. And I started writing it down, and I realized it was a mother. And if your mother is telling you a story, it's different. It's different. It's a fable, right? It's what you need to grow up. It's what you need to know to be a good human being, to survive, to overcome grief, to raise your own children, whatever you need as a person. And so I put those things in Eleanor's tale. I gave her a story that may be factual, but it's like a game of telephone, right? 16 generations. You get a little of this and a little of that from mom and the next mom and the next mom and the next mom. So that's what Eleanor's tale is.
When you were writing all of that and going back and forth between Eleanor's story and then Alice and then also Penn, it's really 3 stories, I guess, from different perspectives. Was there anything that you had to cut out that you wish you didn't, or that didn't end up adding to the book?
Yeah, I had a whole character that was a brother or a stepbrother for Alice who was not a good guy, and issues with him, and he was part of the motivation for them to leave. And then he came back around at the end as an issue for them, and he just wasn't necessary, so I cut him out.
You mentioned, you alluded to how large the book is, and it is not a small book. No, I mean, on average, books are about 272 pages, and you're well above 400 pages. And
Thanks.
You're welcome. Are you kidding me? I'm grateful for that. What sustained it for me as a reader, and we reference this a little bit in the review as well, is the writing style itself, that it's wonderfully lyrical and dreamlike almost. It really feels like you're immersing yourself into an experience, so much so that when you put the book down, you kind of miss having that experience, and that's what led me back to the book time and time again to finish it in just a couple of days, really. I know this from previous conversations, or you'll correct me if I'm misremembering this, but you are a vivid dreamer, and you have a good recall of those dreams. Is actually something you two have in common. So I'm wondering if that informs your writing style and of this particular book as well.
You may be right. I have said I dream like crazy, like every night. Sometimes I'm tired when I wake up. And I do have recurring dreams. I have dreams that I recognize, and I think, oh, good, I remember this one. This is what's going to happen. And it does. And then sometimes I can change them if I work really hard. So I think my imagination is overactive, maybe. And my husband, we've been married 25 years, and I'll say, I had this dream. And he's like, because nobody wants to listen to your dreams, really, but you, right? And I think writing a book is like you're having a dream, and you've gotten it down on paper, and then you put it out in the world and read it. Or when a reader reads it, that's my favorite conversation, is this, where they've had the dream too, and they want to talk about it. And so you get to talk about the dream with somebody who cares. It's awesome. I've finally figured out how to do that. And I guess maybe it does. I love language. I love lyricism. I love music. I listen to music. I can't listen to lyrics while I write. But I do listen to a lot of music when I write. And then when I'm not writing, I listen to a lot of music because I have my favorites, and I usually choose them because they're storytellers and their lyrics are meaningful to me. There was a particular Brandi Carlile album that I listened to over and over and over again. She has been sent a copy of the book. Hello. And there was a song on her album called Fulton County Jane Doe. And if those stones are true, that's where Eleanor ended up. But there's also, I was a surviving twin. And she only lived a day, but that ghost thing is there, and that idea of this lost person, the person you don't want to be forgotten, is there. And I found that in her music, and I don't know, all of that to me is like stirring a pot with the language and the way that it sounds and creating the mood for maybe that's the theater geek in me. You're setting your reader up. You got to like cast the spell so that they'll follow you, and then the book gets long.
So with that kind of dreaminess that happens a lot in the Evertail area, and like when Pen's exploring, and then she goes into Savannah, and it kind of swings to the other end, and it's like not dreamy anymore. It's quick and it's fast, and it's what's happening, and it's how she's feeling because she's overwhelmed and excited. And she finds the Girl Scouts, and so the Girl Scouts are one of Savannah's many claims to fame. So I was wondering why you decided to kind of include that swing back into Savannah and like her future really.
Well, the whole point of Alice bringing Pen back to the estate, because Alice doesn't want to be there. She doesn't want to remember her history and her childhood there with her mother. But Pen has lost her father and recently her grandfather. And it's the end of World War II, but when it's the end of World War II and you're living the end of World War II, you don't know it's the end. It's just not looking good, right? And all the boys are gone. And you have a 13-year-old daughter, and you're trying to keep her in the living world, I guess. And Pen is sort of drifting at this point emotionally. So when they go back to this house, one of the ways that Alice is kind of forced to take her hands off is that Pen wants to go into Savannah on her own, on her bike, and she wants to see the shipyards where they're building the Liberty ships. And she meets a girl there who is working on the Liberty ships, which wakes her up. And it brings her back into a sense of purpose and her own life, not all of the dreamy things that she's learning in the past, what these women have done and how lovely, and she's going to just hang out at this very remote, beautiful place and Evertail is not all great. She's learned some history there, and she's learned some history in Savannah, and she's growing up. So I want it to feel that way. I want it to feel like I'm taking a step into my own self for Pen. Does that answer your question? Yes. Oh, Girl Scouts. That's why the Girl Scouts.
Yes.
I forgot.
Also Girl Scouts.
So the Girl Scout thing was intentional because obviously the Girl Scouts, but also because the book, it gave her something that she could start putting into the book. She draws her own little badges, little pictures into the book.
It's a beautiful touch, and you do something with the Telfair Museum as well, which is a nice moment that really grounds it in Savannah's story also. It's really a nice love letter to Savannah, and I want to switch and talk about a different city that relates to your story as well. But before I do that, 5-minute warning gang, we do want to invite some questions from you all as well, so I think we might each have one left. And then this is a sketchy looking group, so it's a big risk to open this up to audience questions, but we're going to do it anyway. But I want to talk to you about Atlanta, because that is now your home, and you've got an event coming up at the Margaret Mitchell House, I understand, with Colleen Oakley, who I've gotten to talk to about some of her books as well. And there is what always looks to me from afar to be this lovely literary landscape of Atlanta right now. And I'm wondering, do you feel that way? Is that true to your experiences as writer and reader? What's it like to be a writer in Atlanta right now?
Great. I have made so many friends over I've been trying to do this a long time, Jonathan. So this is not, I owe a lot of favors. But the people that I've met in Atlanta have been great to me. Jocelyn Jackson was one of the first. Patty Callahan Henry was the very first. We published our first short story together 100 years ago. And she hasn't aged a day. I don't know how that's possible. And I feel like there are several writers group. There's the Atlanta Writers Group, and then Broadleaf Writers just had me do a thing, and he's wonderful, and we all kind of help one another. It's I don't find a lot of competition. I do find a lot of inclusion. We bring everybody in when we can, and then when I did Tinderbox, that was one of the reasons that I did that. I know, you're laughing because I'm leading you right into the next question. But I think writing is lonely if you let it be. I think you can find another writer if you know which rock to look under. Ha ha, there's your rock metaphor. See, I can do it too.
So I'm switching my last question because I have to ask it now, so hopefully you guys will take care of the rest of the things I'm curious about. But will there be more Tinderbox Writers Retreats in the future?
I hope so. I would like to do another one once this book tour calms down with all of this. I miss it. I love sitting with a group of women and just telling stories. That's all I want to do, really. I got an ugly email. I'm a success now. I got an ugly email about the fact that the workshop is strictly for women, but that's my jam right now. It may change in the future, but that's what I created it for. And I love going and speaking at schools to kids, and I love teaching classes like for Atlanta Writers, where we do let the men in the door. So I really do like all of it.
I can tell, I can see the joy, and I can hear the joy when you talk about it. And I hope we've got some joy in the room, and we'll see some hands go up with some questions. Anybody got a question they want to ask Kimberly? Oh, we got one right over here. Yes, ma'am.
Do you have a playlist for the book?
I don't. I did for River Witch. For this one, I mean, I really literally mostly listened to that one album. And only after it came out. Before that, I had some things that I had kind of pulled together. Weirdly, we went to a Sting concert 100 years ago when he was doing the thing with the orchestra and going around. It was the best concert. It was an outdoor thing. And he did a song, and I wish I could remember the name of it right now to tell you. But I think it's called 1,000 Years, maybe. It's this, and there was heat lightning. And I thought, ooh, that's interesting, because I was still trying to figure out what it was that I was writing about. And I was listening to that song and the generations, and in the book. And then the song is talking about all these different years going by, all these ages going by, and he would still love this person. And I thought, yeah, that's what I'm doing here. So I listen for stuff like that. It'll catch my ear.
I have a question.
Yes.
You brought up the story about the rocks, the Dare rocks being taken to Brunel, a woman's college. And your story is about relationships between mothers and daughters and carrying that legacy through oral history.
Yep.
How is Brunel reacting to the story?
Not a whole lot.
Really?
I don't know. We'll see. I think they're probably worried what the book has to say. They don't know. They haven't read it yet. I'm trying to schedule a visit. I have been in touch with them so that we could put the picture in the book so readers could see the stones, because I don't know about you, but I had never even heard anything about them, and it was intriguing. All of the documentaries that you watch, like on the History Channel about them, are a little bit woo-woo, like you might be going out to look for Bigfoot with these guys, right? And so it's maybe embarrassing to them a little bit. I don't know. They don't make a big deal out of it. Now, they initially, those stones, and I'm not faulting the college, tons of stone. I mean, literal tons. They had to find a place to store them. And so they all went in this dirt floor electrical room under the stage at the school for a long time. And the main one, I think, was kept in the president's office. Now there's some of them that are in an archive room, and they keep the main one in this really nice glass box. And you can make an appointment and go and see it. But they don't advertise, hey guys, we've got this, it feels like they're a little bit embarrassed. So I will be intrigued to see who goes knocking on the door and says, so, hey, where's Eleanor's stone? We would really like to know, because I'd love to see that happen. I would get a kick out of that.
Well, my mother graduated from Brunel in the 50s, so I can't wait to give her a book and see what she has to say.
They do have a ghost. They had a play that they wrote. They have a ghost named Agnes, who supposedly was a student, not to do with the Dare Stone, but Agnes is the name of the daughter, the second daughter that the Stones have given Eleanor. So, and Agnes is the name of the daughter in my book, too. So I don't know what they'll do with it. We'll see. Little colleges can be funny, They can either, be your best pal or you just never hear from them. I don't know. I got to go make friends.
we have another question out there? If not, we've got a couple more. Holland's dying to ask, I'm sure. Yes, right there, yes.
What's next? Do you have a new dream in your head? Is there a sequel? Like, what do you?
I told you I'm a crock pot. I'm supposed to have another book in 2024, so what I need is prayer. Because I've got to figure out how to write it that fast, because I'm still stewing. I'm not. But in the stew, I don't talk about it very much, because I will get lost in it if I start talking about it. I don't know why that happens. The only thing I know to tell you is I hope that my publisher is brave enough to let me write it. It's not a horror, but it is a ghost story. Of course.
As I would expect. The only time it has rained since we've been here was the last time you mentioned ghost stories, so I was waiting to hear it start it again. Yes. Was there a question? Yes, sir.
How long do you think it takes you from the time you get an idea for a novel that seems to be workable to actually getting something serious on paper?
It changes. It's different. Sometimes River Witch was quick. This book, I learned about the history. I learned about the Dare Stones when my 21-year-old son was in pull-ups. And I didn't start writing it till maybe 9 years ago, and then I didn't like what I was doing, so I put it away. I didn't know what to do with it. So I seriously wrote it for about 3 years. But I have ideas for things that are incomplete in my head and have had for years. I just kind of wait until something strikes me. It's not, I wish that I could just pull one out of the drawer and sit down and that was the one. The one I'm currently working on, I've done, I guess, about a year of research. And when I research, I am not a historian. Don't open this book and think that you are going to sit down and read from a historian. I am not. I'm a storyteller. I lie. I pick and choose what I want to be in there. I entertain myself, and I hope I entertain you. And that's kind of how my research goes. If I'm entertained, if it's something that tweaks my interest and I get a charge out of it, then it goes faster. And then sometimes I get bored with it. So it's kind of like dating.
Well, look,
So what would you hope people would take away from it or learn from it? Like, I don't even know anything about the Lost Colony of Roanoke.
Oh. So then that's where you start. I have two things that I guess I think personally. One is that when I was a little girl, I was that kid that would go to the library with my class, and then the class would go back, and they'd say, "Where's Kim?" And I would still be in the corner and didn't even know that my class had left, and then somebody would come find me and take me back to class. I love better than anything to just find a book that I didn't know about, because it felt like it was a discovery, like it was waiting there for me, right? And like nobody else had read it, and I was the only one that knew about it, and when I was reading it, it was all mine. And I love that feeling. I love a great big book, and I love to find it and then just disappear into it. And just, I want to look at it and hold it and smell it and all of those things that make you love a book. I want this book to be for somebody. That's why I'm so excited about the cover. The peacock feathers were my idea. There were really ugly flowers before. And there are peacock feathers. It's a little nod to Flannery O'Connor. But I want them to feel that way about it. And the second thing is that I want you to put this book down, even if you go into it hoping to solve the Lost Colony. I hope you put it down and you love the mystery better.
The more I hear, I grew up in Virginia, so the Lost Colony, I was that kid going, what the heck happened to these people? And then
I think it all happened. You know, there's so many different theories about it. And I want to say, y'all, what do we ever agree on? Especially when human beings are afraid and desperate. It's a big church split. There's no telling where all they went.
It reminds me a little bit of the Shroud of Turin.
Yeah.
So many people want to know the exact answer. Is it real? Is it not? As opposed to, what does it mean to you? What does it represent?
It's not that they want the answer. It's that they want to give themselves permission to believe something. Because it's about wonder and hope and being surprised. And there's so few things that surprise us or fill us with wonder or fill us with hope. And so when there is a mystery like this, we want a conclusion. That's because the story's not finished. That bugs us too as human beings. But more than that, we're just looking for a way to be hopeful for ourselves, I think.
I guess my point is, sometimes I don't think we need a conclusion. The Hebrews believed, if you read the Old Testament, it talks about there were thousands of soldiers out there. They used numbers, like crazy. And nobody was out there going 1, 2, 3, 4. And the whole point was, we're telling a story.
Yes.
Forget the facts. And that's sort of the Western mindset versus the Eastern mindset. They're telling a story, and you're supposed to get a message through the story. Forget about all the facts.
Yes.
And that's what I'm saying. Whether the Shroud of Turin is real or not, or whether your story about this woman is right or not, what are we supposed to hear in this story, and what are we supposed to learn in this story?
You get the prize tonight. I literally have a prize for you in a minute.
It's a big stone. It's right there.
They made one. I'll tell you, it's funny. If you look at pictures from my book launch, the bookstore made one. Because it's not rocket science to carve something into a stone, right? But that first stone, they have never been able to prove whether it's authentic or not. And they've tested it. Much smarter people than me. And then there's some tests they haven't run, which makes me wonder why. Right.
We're going to give Holland the last question. So this is the second to last question, because hearing you engage with our audience here tonight makes me wonder at what point they enter the process for you as the writer. At what point do you start thinking about the recipients of the story, and it's not just you in the stew listening to Sting? At what point do the readers come in and you think, I've got to deliver something that's going to be meaningful for them?
I don't know. I don't. I tried that when I was newer to it. I don't think about it much while I'm writing it. I think about the sound of it. I read it out loud, and if it sounds like something I would want to sit and listen to, then I'm happy with it. I don't know that I'm writing to a reader in particular so much as I loved story time. I loved sitting and listening to stories being read to me. I love doing that too, reading out loud to people. And I'm going to get to read my author's note for the audiobook because they forgot to record it.
Very nice.
Yeah. So I don't know that I think about a particular reader at a particular time. I think about them all the time, but not because I'm writing a specific way for them, just that it's kind of a magic trick. Like, I want to pull you in while I'm writing. Does that answer the question?
It does. Oh, absolutely, it does.
So I'm going to do a really quick question and then a follow-up question to make it make sense. I'm sorry, guys, 2 more. Did you always want to be a writer?
Back to the library. I grew up in Dalton, Georgia, carpet capital of the world, I must say. And we had the library when I was a little girl was this big brick antebellum house, the big white door columns on the front. It was beautiful. And I love a house. Any neat old house I love. I grew up in a really old house. It was built in 1912. We had no air conditioning. We had no insulation. Like, the cats would come in from under the house and through where the pipes came into the house. And we'd be sitting in the kitchen and a cat would just come out of the cabinet. So in the summer, my mom would take us to the library. And I can remember being 5 or 6, and I'm telling you, I know for a fact more of my report cards in elementary school came home with me with good grades, but in the behavior part always said, talks too much and won't stay in her seat. And I just wanted to help, I wanted to help. I wasn't in trouble because I was being bad, but I just was trying to do the teacher's job. So I went in the library at 5 or 6 years old, and I was already charmed by the place, and I walked in and I saw all those books, and I truly remember thinking, this is how you talk forever. If I can write a book, I can just write lots of books, and I can just talk forever. Tell all the stories. And I had been in so much trouble for stories at school. I've been in trouble on the playground. I scared kids with a story I told them one time, and I had to apologize to my class. So that's where writing began, with storytelling.
So my question is, what advice would you give to your younger writer self, or to any young writers?
Talk too much. Don't stay in your seat. And don't do it because you want to be published. I never dreamed I would be published. That was a total fluke that I had another writer say to me, you're funny. You should write a short story. And nothing I write is funny, by the way. That's what's funny to me. But everything I've ever done has been storytelling, from theater, from even singing in my church choir growing up. Everything has been a way of telling story. I was a ballet dancer. I thought that's what I was going to do, and then I had health reasons that I could not do that. I wanted to teach ballet. So everything led to one thing after the other. Teaching is, in my opinion, all you do as a teacher is tell stories. And if you're not, they're not listening to you. And so the writing part was always there. There was always language arts fairs and really bad poetry as a teenager, and journals and journals and journals, and I don't even know how many love letters to my husband when we were dating. And so it's always been writing, reading, but the publishing part felt like something somebody else could do. It didn't seem, and it also didn't seem responsible. Can I get insurance with that? And it's an art, so it's hard to take that risk.
I think. Do you have anything?
I do not. You want to close it out?
Sure. Thank you, everyone who is here watching, and everyone online, for being here and for doing this with us and listening to us talk, and mostly her talk. And mostly thank you to you for doing this.
Thank you.
It's been an absolute pleasure, and thank you to NeverMore for hosting.
Thank you.
And I believe there's books over there.
They make really good Mother's Day gifts.
So Kim will be signing in that room right back there, and we are selling books right up here, folks. Thank you all so much for being with us.